However you followed this journey, if you've reached this devotion, you're likely right at or just past the halfway point. If you just completed Presence, you could approach this one by imagining that your abiding with God's absence hasn't yet been met with God's arrival. Try to stay in that space of waiting to see what possibilities for risk might arise. It's more likely you've come here from the fear devotion though, and for me at least, trying to transgress fear with risk is probably the hardest move that God could ask me to make. And there's certainly a lot of options in the theological traditions that can help me avoid making it. For one, I could deny that God is terrifying at all. God is love. The perfect progressive proof text, true love casts out fear. We're smart enough to know that we've moved past Calvin. Or on the other side of the liberal conservative divide, we can redistribute the fear. I can be less scared of God's judgment if I direct it towards others. Or even romanticize it, becoming so enamored with my fear that I block all the ways that God might come to me as tender. All these impulses have problems, by which I mean they all have the potential to keep us from encountering God. An encounter is what we're looking for here. Now I want to pick up Mary's story that I talked about in the fear devotion. Casting about for how to transgress her version of fear in the face of God, I initially thought about writing this devotion on consent. But that felt a little too on the nose for our current climate, and besides, I've written about Mary's consent elsewhere. So then I got tempted to focus this one on trust, because trust seems like a natural antidote to fear. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the willingness to risk happens prior to consent or to trust. I'm always risking some part of myself when I consent to another. Trust requires first risking the possibility that that person is not worthy of trust at all. Before Mary could consent to God or trust God, she had to take a risk. Before I can consent to God in prayer or trust that God won't abandon me once we meet there, I have to take a risk as well. What risk looks like will be different for each of us. For me, though, it's about praise and worship music. No, really. Back when I was a charismatic evangelical, worship was ecstatic. Contrary to popular belief about evangelicals, it was even erotic. I'd lose myself in the build, the peak, and the denouement of a song that seemed to go on forever. Worship music opened out onto eternity. It was a profound act of consenting to and trusting in God's wild presence. Then I went to divinity school and I learned all the ways those songs are theologically problematic. So I learned new songs, more inclusive songs, songs that sung of a kinder, gentler God. Really great songs that move a lot of people's hearts, though probably not their bodies, but they didn't move mine. Because while those songs might not have been theologically problematic, to me they were theologically lacking. Their God was less personal, less intimately entwined with all I do and all I am. These songs didn't contain a beat or a drive that could stir my desire for the divine. They contained my praise to deliver it to God, which is just fine, but they didn't unleash my praise upon God. They didn't undo me, pour me out, drench God with what flowed. Of course, debates around music in churches are dangerous territories to tread, and I'm not actually saying that one of these styles of music is better than the other. More so, I'm saying that this kind of evangelical praise and worship, it actually requires me to risk being vulnerable more than traditional hymnody does. And so it's the kind that scares me. I mean, that might sound silly to you. They're just songs, but it feels risky to me. And precisely because they're my site of risk, when I take that risk, I see Jesus. When I let loose with my body and my voice and I sing my desire into the rafters, no matter who sees or hears me do it, when I take that risk, I see Jesus. That's my risk. I don't know what yours is, but as the meditations and activities draw a circle for sacred risk in this devotion, I hope you'll get insight into what hovers at the edges of your own fear. Once you've completed this devotion, you're likely headed to the sacred spaces of certainty or doubt, though of course perhaps somewhere else entirely. So maybe ask yourself what feels like the riskier move for you when you're done. Moving to certainty or doubt? Which one lures you towards something that frightens you, but where God might be waiting?